Hello, and welcome to the JC Blogspot. Today, we are here with Justice Collaboratory member Dr. Benjamin Justice, Distinguished Professor of Education at Rutgers University, and past president of the History of Education Society. Hi, Ben. Thanks for
Hi,
joining us.
thank you.
First question is from Beth.
Yeah. Well, we want to talk to you about a recent report that you co-authored with the New Jersey State Policy Lab called Computing on the Inside: Recommendations on Internet Access for Incarcerated Persons in New Jersey. This report seeks to explore and recommend policies for online access for people incarcerated in New Jersey state prisons. So let's start off by, can you tell us a little bit about the genesis of this report? And as an education historian, what made you decide to start looking at computing policies in New Jersey prisons?
So first, I want to give a shout out to my co-author, Ra'Zulu Ukawabut, who I met through a mutual colleague. Ra'Zulu is really interested in carceral reform in New Jersey, and I brought him on both as a research assistant and as a co-author. So this report is his as well as mine. I became interested in the topic mainly because I had an opportunity to take time to research it. So I've been doing work off and on with the New Jersey Department of Corrections for a while on doing professional development for their teachers inside their facilities. And the New Jersey State Policy Lab put out a call for small grants to support research on specific policy initiatives in the state. And I thought that looking at computer policy would be great. Then I found Ra'Zulu and we worked on it together. The reason that I really wanted to work on it was clear that New Jersey at the time was really far behind where we hoped it would be in terms of access to computing technology and access to the internet. And that was really important to Ra'Zulu as well as to me.
When you say it was far behind, was it far behind where New Jersey had been aiming to be, or was it far behind the national average?
It's hard to say what a national average is. But I would say both. So for a state that is as wealthy and progressive as New Jersey, it was surprising how far behind we were compared to other states that are similar in that regard.
Yeah.
We were also far behind in terms of some of the stated goals of the state of New Jersey for its educational programming. In New Jersey state prisons, there are people who are still receiving their K-12 education. Not very many, but there are some. And according to the state of New Jersey, that needs to include rigorous training and opportunity in technology. And there was no question that people who were in those programs were not getting that part. Nothing like what people who are on the outside who are in K-12 education are getting exposed to.
When you looked at the best practices, what's the value of that in a broad for all prisons nationwide?
Right. I would say there are three things we found that I think are valuable and interesting. I'll do them in reverse order. The first is smart prisons are coming. And by smart prison, I mean a prison where robots are managing human movement and the opening and closing of doors and gateways, where video surveillance watches what people are doing, where it monitors their communications, it listens to what's happening. You can use predictive AI to see if somebody's doing something that looks really weird and then send it right on to a human who can take a look at it. Smart prisons also can potentially include all kinds of media. One way of thinking about this is really bad news, right? People are constantly monitored. On the other hand, a way of thinking about it is people in prison are kind of already constantly monitored. And if you could do it in a way that enabled the people who were actually not doing anything wrong more freedom, say, of communication, because their communication can be monitored by a machine, so that like they're more free in a sense to engage in non-harmful communication, which is most of the communication that they want to engage in. That could potentially be a good thing. So smart prisons is one. New Jersey has no plan for smart prisons, zilch, and they at least need to be thinking about it, even if they don't go that route. Because if they don't, the technologies involved in smart prisons are going to sort of start invading prisons like weeds. And you don't want to have it done the wrong way, because then things really will be bad. It's much better to have the judicial branch, the legislative branch, the executive branch of the state government be anticipating these things so that they have policies in place that make sure that things are happening that are consistent with people's rights. So that's the first thing, smart prisons. The second thing is that we We thought a lot in the study about what could be in the internet, what could be in computers that's worthy. And it turns out that there's a lot of great content that prisons that are using this stuff are able to give to people. Therapeutic content, spiritual content, health content, um, as well as sort of more traditional K-12 content, music content, cultural enrichment content, all kinds of stuff that is really good and healthy for people to have access to. There really is no downside to any of this kind of content. And so, insofar as we can show the state of New Jersey and other states that there's good stuff out there and they really should be thinking about this, and that research suggests that when people have access to this, they are more content, that there's less violence in prisons, for example, that have widespread tablet programs. These are good things, right? And the third thing we discovered was this fabulous paper by Babarek, Fisher, and Hunter that argues that the internet itself is an expression of liberty and freedom. So depriving people of internet access is a form of liberty deprivation, which is what incarceration should be. And so they make this really awesome argument, which is maybe we should consider deprivation from the internet as a form of punishment. And if we think of that alongside of incarceration and not sort of baked into incarceration, then we may be able to come up with much more creative ways to think about what it means for someone on the inside to have access to this whole virtual world freely or unfreely. And so part of what we want New Jersey to think about and all states to think about is that proposition. Does internet deprivation constitute a significant enough form of punishment that we may be able to get more creative about what we mean by incarceration? Maybe we can lock up people for less time and lock up fewer people, and instead perhaps say you can't go on the internet for 6 months. That's your punishment. I don't know. But in any case, I mean, I think overall what we found was that the laws that we have, the constitutional law that we have at the federal level, the laws that we have at the state level, the policies that we have at the institutional level are all rooted in a world that doesn't exist anymore. And we need a plan. And we don't have one.
You group your findings around 5 general topics: security, law, education, reentry, and smart prisons. Could you briefly discuss each one of these? I think you gave us a sense of the smart prison issue, although welcome hearing more, but maybe speaking to the security, law, education, reentry elements of the research.
Sure. So probably the single biggest argument that people make against having computing in prisons is the security issue. And the security issue is real. People can engage in criminal activity from inside, which is not what we want. Already I'm not sure prisons make much sense, but insofar as they do make sense, allowing people to commit crime while they are incarcerated makes zero sense. And so there are legitimate concerns about computing technology and internet access inside carceral settings, not only in terms of sort of crime commission, but also in terms of potentially harming other people who are also incarcerated by finding personal information about them, or having leverage over people who work in these facilities by finding personal information about them. That it's just not, that kind of stuff is not productive. On the other hand, obviously there are great potential benefits that I already talked about a little bit. In terms of law, I talked a little bit about that. The laws that we have both at the federal level in terms of rights of imprisoned people, but also in terms of state policy, are just way behind at where we are as a society. The laws, for example, that govern email are laws that were decided back when there was just paper mail. Paper mail is not like email. There are different things. And what about social media? Many people don't even use email anymore. Just, old people like me. Young people don't send email messages, right? How do we regulate that communication? That communication is unlike a letter with a stamp on it. In terms of education, I think the potential for using technology both to improve education in traditional subjects, but also technology education, obviously is very important. We want K-12 students to learn how to navigate the world using computer and internet technology. We also want people who are incarcerated to develop those same skills, because when they get out, we expect them to become productive citizens, not just get jobs, but register their car at the DMV, vote, figure out how to get to a hospital, maybe participate as consumers in things that consumers just do automatically now using the internet, form social networks, make friends, all these really important things that people in our contemporary society need to be able to do to be healthy and productive. We need education for that. And I'll add to that, people who are incarcerated typically start being incarcerated in their late teens or early 20s at precisely the time that other people are using these to navigate the world as a young adult. And when you get out 10, 20 years later, and you're 20 years behind in that skill set, or 10 years, or even 5 years, that's really a debilitating absence. And that ties to what I was saying about education, ties to reentry. Obviously, if you want people to really have successful reentry, which is good for everybody, then they've got to have the skills. They have to get out and know how to navigate the world. They need to be able to go to a library and sit down at an internet station at libraries, which are a godsend for people who have been released, and know what to do. And then finally, smart prisons we've talked.
When you compared all the different states in the literature, is there one state that are more advanced than other states?
Yeah, the places that are doing the most interesting stuff are doing it on a case by case basis because, again, the law hasn't caught up with what we need. But I'll give you an example, which is Maine. Now, Maine is an atypical state. It's a very white state, for one thing. They also, not coincidentally, have a very low incarceration rate, one of the lowest incarceration rates in the country. With that said, they have one of the most progressive internet access policies. There are people in the state of Maine right now who have full-time jobs from their cell where they are working as computer technologists, or in one case, someone for a while was working as a college teacher. And that is, in my view, great. But let me be clear. The state of Maine requires that they give a percentage of whatever they make to victims if they committed crimes against people, or I don't know if they set up victims funds generally if there's no identifiable victim. I'm not sure how the victim part works. But the point is that there is still a punitive aspect to what is happening. A percentage of what they earn goes to victims, and a percentage of what they earn goes back to the state of Maine to contribute to the cost of their incarceration, right? If you think of any business as having land, labor, and capital expenses, like the state of Maine is providing all three of those things, and the business person, the person working, should reasonably contribute to that. But on the other hand, it means that people inside are doing productive work, they're building skills, and they're actually saving money so that when they get out, re-entry is going to be pretty smooth. I don't see a downside, especially if they can end up engaging in some sense of social repair. I think that's good. So Maine would be one example.
Great example.
And legislation that allows for that, Ben, is that regulation coming from a Department of Corrections, or is that legislation coming from the state legislative bodies?
That's state law. However, state law, and this will probably be true in any state law still gives prison officials a lot of leeway in terms of what they actually do in practice. And one thing that Ra'Zulu and I found was that oftentimes that's where the problems are, because prison officials, guards in particular, will use the ability to withhold internet access and or tablet access. Even if your tablet is closed and can't get on the internet, but you have a tablet, they can take that away anytime they want. They can do anything they want to you, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
And so that becomes a thing that guards can do if they don't like somebody or they're angry at somebody. It's a form of power that guards have over inmates that is not, we don't have any case law, so I don't have a legal complaint against it, but I would say that there's a moral complaint against it, and it's just counterproductive. I don't see the point of having there be no due process within the prison that legitimizes the access and the taking away of the access. So that is a problem. And that's a problem that we heard about when speaking to people in Maine, too. I mean, Maine may have this policy, but again, there are very, very few people who get to exercise internet access because of the discretion that the institutions have. And back, if we can circle back to security, it's not crazy that people who are running these places are worried about security legitimately and really do need to make decisions on a case-by-case basis.
Can you talk a little bit about your recommendations for New Jersey Department of Corrections and how that might be applicable to other states as well?
Our biggest recommendation is that the state of New Jersey, some branch of the state of New Jersey, the legislature perhaps, or the executive branch, really should convene a task force to look at this issue. And it's important that that task force include a variety of stakeholders. And in particular, we want to make sure that universities have a place in this. We didn't put this in the report specifically, but university professors do have a virtue. And that virtue is we can actually say what we really think. People who work in corrections work in what is essentially a paramilitary culture, where they don't talk about what happens at work, they don't question authority, and there's a lot of space for abuse in that context, right? And so when you have someone who is actually free to say what they really think on a task force, you can actually cut some ice. In addition to forming a task force, we recommend that the judicial branch take seriously this idea that internet access and internet deprivation are really issues about carcerality and liberty, and that they really should take seriously the idea that being able to access the internet may, if not be a right, be something that at least deserves some serious consideration. And we also suggest that prisons in New Jersey, and really prisons everywhere, I think we would also argue, need to be much more transparent in what's going on inside of them. And what they need is they need not internal audits. They need outside observers to periodically come in and do research. We started with the question, how hard is it or why is it hard to do research in prisons? And there are good reasons for it to be hard, but it shouldn't be so hard that you can never figure out what's going on. Everybody in our society should know what's happening inside our prisons because we are citizens in a democracy, and ultimately the prisons should be reporting to us. We're paying for them. They're doing it in our name, but they don't tell us anything that's going on in them except in annual reports that tell us very little. And so we recommend in our report that the state of New Jersey partner with universities and do periodic research projects where they look at things like how well computing and internet access are going. And I hope that having that be a part of the culture of carceral settings will just improve the carceral settings, period. Shining a light is a good thing.
Ben, I find myself thinking you spoke about your initial way into doing research and your connection with the prisons is through people doing education in prison. And I'm wondering how those folks think about computers or internet access, either in curriculum or their ability to teach well and for their students to do well who happen to be incarcerated.
I first encountered groups of people talking about prison education in New Jersey through the NJ STEP program, which is a program like other state programs that creates architecture for people who are incarcerated to take college level courses and start to accrue credits so that upon release they can go get a degree. And the teachers I was speaking to at one event in particular talked about how frustrating it is that they as teachers can't access the internet and oftentimes can't even take their equipment into the facility. So they have to use what's there. What I saw when I toured one facility was that teachers were teaching using pencils and paper that then would be confiscated after the lesson. It's really hard to create a kind of continuity of learning, especially at the college level, but not only at the college level, in that kind of setting. So I don't know if I answered your question. Facility, we visited the secure unit, which means solitary confinement. And you can think of it as a giant cube that's 3 stories high, and each story is a tier with cells, but the center of the cube is open. And in the center of this open cube, there's literally a cage. For people who are in solitary who get their state guaranteed K-12 education, there will be a teacher on the outside of the cage. and the person will be released from their cell, brought down and put into the cage, and will receive their instruction through the mesh of the cage, while all around them in the giant cube there are people screaming because, of course, many people in solitary confinement, not surprisingly, have serious mental health challenges. Furthermore, enter the cage to get your guaranteed K-12 education, you are strip searched. You are then strip searched when your lesson is over. So to get your state guaranteed K-12 education when you are in solitary, you have to submit your body to a search by people and then be in this cage with people screaming around you while you are trying to learn something. And of course, you don't get to keep the pencil or the paper when you leave. There's a lot of things that computer technology can do to fix everything I just described.
Yeah.
Right? A tablet in your cell where you're talking to your tutor.
Virtually. Have you shared the recommendations with New Jersey?
I have been approached by someone who works for a state legislature or legislator, and they are interested in maybe pursuing the idea of a task force.
That's great.
So that's exciting. I think anything that gets people talking about these issues and being more proactive, because the technology is going to happen one way or another. It's already there in many cases. And I think that it's a win-win if we're smart. And if we're not smart, it'll be a Frankenstein's monster of one technology poorly used after another, making these kinds of settings even less productive than they are.
And I think this reality of just how pervasive the internet and computer use is in everyone's life every day, all the time, that to deprive someone of that and to interrupt any kind of ongoing development that they would have in relationship with this technology and this way of being in the world is such a deficit when they are to leave that I think this question of its constitutionality seems inevitable.
Yeah, it is. And I worry about the current court's way of thinking about these things, but even so, it would be nice to at least have a better theory of what the internet is in relationship to liberty than what we have now, which is we don't really have a theory at all.
You know what else I find myself thinking about, Ben, is I'm listening to all these different dimensions of your report, and the inquiry that you and your co-author did is also the role that the computer might offer. That we all know, those of us that study prisons, that many, many people in prison are parents. And it seems to me that this is a way to not only help foster and build relationship and continuity, but also that when someone is released from prison, the way that they might support their kid doing homework or be in relationship with their kid, that technology is increasing a part of the parent-child relationship. And so this seems to me also really important in terms of parenting.
Dana, what you just said is really interesting. I belong to the board of CLICK, which is an organization in Connecticut that brings parents who are incarcerated together with their children over a book. The program sends in a trained facilitator to help the parent and the child navigate reading a book together. And it's a wonderful program. And to your point about the way in which technology can bring families together or at least sustain relationships between incarcerated people and their children, one of the challenges that CLICK faces is that prisons are really reluctant right now to let people bring paper in because unfortunately there is now a drug trade in paper. Paper comes in, the paper is soaked in drugs, and then people can either through contact or through smoking, the paper can get high. And it's incredibly dangerous, but also it's something that prisons are really worried about because it's very, very difficult to detect. Being able to do that same program over a tablet is more desirable than having to run the gauntlet every time that we try to get someone in with a book just so they can read to their kid. I really appreciate this opportunity, and I hope people read the report.
I hope so too. We'll make sure of it.
Thank you.